Oh, hey, and okay.
Hey, calling Chris Anderson. Where are ya?
Well, right at this very moment, I'm in
Oh no,
London.
it's
I'm in
another
London.
freaking complex answer.
I know, right? I'm in the
Okay,
south of France
you're
somewhere,
in
hopefully
this
with a very nice bottle of rosé, and
and a
hopefully it's not
lovely group of people,
yeah, and hopefully it's not 150 degrees. But yes,
and
that's where
you're
I'm at.
you're doing the Riviera to the Rhine.
I am, yes.
So by the time you get to the Rhine, maybe it'll be
Cooler.
cooler. Yeah,
I mean, and where are you?
I'm in Chicago. Although again, actually, when the show
Another
is on,
complex answer.
yes, it is. When the show is on, I'm going to be in New Hampshire doing trail clearing because I'm a very outdoorsy guy.
Okay, wait a minute. So you don't have trails that need clearing in Chicago?
I am trail clearing with my class, some of the members of
So
my class.
people from Dartmouth don't have trails where they live. They have to go to
Yes, we all have to travel to the Moosilauke Ravine Lodge, a place we've
Uh-huh.
all been to before, where we're
Okay.
doing trail clearing around Mount Moosilauke, which is close to our
So
hearts.
you're paying money to go clear brush from a trail that's okay. That's good for you. Good. It's good for you.
Welcome, everybody, to History Happy Hour. Thank you to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for their assistance in bringing you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. Whether you're watching live, watching on replay, listening in your car to the HHH podcast, welcome, podcast. Welcome.
Jeff.
Yeah, and we should mention our Patreon.
Those guys.
We appreciate everybody who supports us via patreon.com and /history happy hour. And of course, these are our top shelf patrons. Our show today is obviously an encore episode, and it's about Liberty ships. So
yes,
we can't look at you as you're coming in, but we hope that you'll tell us what the weather is like where you are and what you're drinking. And, feel free to leave any comments about Chris and I, since we probably won't see them unless somebody leaves one that's so bad.
Well, I think a lot of people are
going to.
I think a lot of people are going to go like, "Why are you going to the woods over there when you could just go to the woods here?" But
okay, and you're doing World War II tours of the Riviera, and you
because
you
it happened there.
What I did. Yes,
it happened there.
That's fine. Excellent.
Okay.
So perfectly stated, Chris. Give me a cue, and I will get us into some content.
Okay. The bar is open.
It is, and today we're going to be talking, as I said, about Liberty ships. One of the Allies' most critical needs in World War II was to build a merchant fleet that could carry soldiers and supplies to theaters around the globe, and to build ships fast enough that U-boats couldn't sink them all. So today we're going to talk about the solution to that problem and tell the epic story of Liberty ships. And our guide today is Doug Most, who's the author of the new book, Launching Liberty. And Doug is another Boston guy. So we have three Bostonish people, two Boston people and
Bostonish people,
three Bostonish people. And Doug is a former editor at the Boston Globe. He's the author of 3 books, and he's an executive editor and assistant vice president at Boston University. So Doug, welcome to History Happy Hour. You may be wondering what you've gotten yourselves into, but you're here.
I'm digging the vibe. So
there we go.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I have a nice fall cider that I'm sipping here.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for
getting right in the swing of things. What are you drinking, Chris?
Lafroig.
All right, I got a beer, so I'm good.
Is that in your PSYOPs glass, Rick?
It is. But I don't need to mention the glass every week. But I know you like to see it.
Like that.
There you go. Doug.
Yeah.
Your last book, we were talking about it before the show went on the air. The Race Underground was about the construction of the New York and Boston subways, and you're a Boston guy, so that made a close connection to you. Now, this is a really different story because it's World War II, and you haven't done a World War II book, but there is kind of a race of sorts involved. So what led you to this topic?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, as I think a lot of authors do, sort of why this topic? And I feel like I need to make up a better answer. The answer is simply
No,
that
we give us the ugly, dirty truth.
the ugly, dirty truth. The ugly, dirty truth is that I'm drawn to stories of interesting people doing interesting things. I start with that premise. I start with the premise of trying to find interesting people doing interesting things. When I first heard about the Liberty ships, not first heard about them, but first started thinking about them, let's say, the first thing anyone does if you're thinking about writing a book is sort of look around and see, has anyone already written that book? Has that story already been told? And what I found with the Liberty ships was a couple things. There was one really good book out there that was written by a British naval gentleman, but it was published by about 25 years ago. It was published by a small naval press, and it really didn't get any visibility. So unfortunately, it just didn't get seen, which happens sometimes. But it was a very well done book. But beyond that, there wasn't really what I thought to be a popular sort of narrative nonfiction story of the Liberty ships. And so that sort of made me look into it further. And the more I looked into it, I was drawn to the characters and the people and the available information out there. And I just thought it was sort of an interesting story. And I think the word I've often used is underappreciated story of World War II.
So, Doug, when I was actually right from the start of the book, it really resonated with me because when I lived in DC many, many, many years ago, I volunteered. Yeah, right. I volunteered on the John Brown, so I have an affinity for that ship. And you tell a really moving story about you're on the John Brown, you're kind of getting the tour, and you had this moment. And so maybe you could tell us about that moment and what struck you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd spent at the point that I visited John W. Brown, I'd been into my research for about 2 or 3 years at that point, and everything I'd been doing was either visiting an archive or spending time online looking at old newspaper articles or reading Liberty ship sort of documents and such. But the Liberty ship itself remained in some way sort of like a two-dimensional thing to me, right? It was on my computer. I was looking at papers and drawings and illustrations and everything, but it sort of remained this 2D sort of thing to me. So as you may know, there are 2 floating Liberty ships left in this country. One is in California, in San Francisco, called the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, and the other is in Baltimore, the SS John W. Brown, which has sort of a funny, fascinating history to it. After the war, the John W. Brown was actually used for about 20 plus years as a public school in New York City. Sort of a funny, quirky background to it. But I obviously needed to go visit the ship. And so I took a trip down to Baltimore. And it was a very sort of, I hate to sort of overstate this, but it was sort of a moving experience for me because I got a private tour of the ship. And I remember pulling up alongside of it with my car and parking my car. And there's the ship, giant, hulking gray steel vessel. And the first thing I did was I walked the length of the ship on the ground. So on the pier, I walked the length of the ship. And a Liberty ship is 441 feet long. So it's about 100 feet longer than a football field. So you walk that length and you're struck by like, okay, that's a big ship, 441 feet. But what I was really struck by when I was walking the ship was the depth of the ship, how deep it was. And that sort of really made me appreciate some of the things that I would later uncover, just how deep the ship was. I got a tour of the ship. The deck house, the engine room, all those things. But it was really when I went down into the cargo hold, and there are 5 cargo holds on a Liberty ship. When I went down into one of those cargo holds, and it was empty, of course, the ship is empty now. And I stood there and I looked sort of up at the ceiling and up at the walls and everything. That was the first moment when I really sort of appreciated the role that these ships played in the war. One Liberty ship, just to throw a couple numbers out to you, one Liberty ship can hold 440 tanks. One ship, 440 tanks. Another ship, one Liberty ship could hold 2,800 Jeeps. So when you put a fleet of them to sea, 3,000 Liberty ships, now you can appreciate the magnitude of this effort. And so when I was standing inside that cargo hold, looking around, it was the first time when I sort of had this realization that, you know, in many ways, this is where the war was won.
Yeah.
That the sailors and the fighters and the soldiers who fought in the war, nothing will ever replace the role that they played, right? Nothing can ever replace that. But they don't win the war without the jeeps and the tanks and the munitions and the food supplies and the uniforms and everything that was brought to them, the ambulances and the medical gear, which came to them on Liberty ships. And so that was sort of a moving, powerful moment for me to sort of be in that cargo hold.
Well, and I was going to say that for context, I was kind of going to say what is a Liberty ship, and you've kind of touched on this. But what is a Liberty ship? You know, what makes it different? And as part of your answer, I mean, these ships were called ugly ducklings by Franklin Roosevelt. I think Churchill referred to them as cheap and nasties. What made them ugly and nasty, and why did we need these ugly, nasty ships so much?
Yeah, so I think a couple ways to answer that question. So you're right; they were ugly. They were 441 feet long. They were about 57 feet wide at their widest part, and they were about the equivalent of a 10-story building tall. So that sort of gives you some basic dimensions of them. And I think the other thing to appreciate is a little bit of context from history. So in World War I, when World War I happened, Americans, we were vastly underprepared for World War I. We were not ready to go to war. And the result was that our soldiers, our fighting military had to end up relying on and almost borrowing essentially a lot of British and French munitions and planes and tanks and jeeps in order to fight in Europe and win that war. President Roosevelt, who was the Undersecretary to the Navy during World War I, when he was president in the 30s, was determined to not let history repeat itself. He was basically of the mindset that if we have to go to war again, we're not going to be caught unprepared. We will be ready to fight. So in addition to building his arsenal of democracy, a term we've all become very familiar with, and we sort of understand what that is, he also realized we needed to build ships. We needed to have vessels to carry that arsenal to our troops around the world. He knew the war wasn't going to be fought New York City or in California or in the plains of Kansas. War was going to be fought across two gigantic oceans. And so we needed to be prepared. And that was sort of a real strategic decision and sort of a factor in the building of the Liberty ships.
So Doug, I want to work in some of the origin story here and tie in a couple questions. One, you know, he's doing all of this because when this gets started, we're not at war yet, and he's operating sort of under the shadow of the Neutrality Act. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, but also just talk about the origin of the ship, because it's different, right?
Right. So the origin of the ship, a lot of people probably make an assumption that this is an American designed ship, but it was actually a British designed ship. Right. It was a British shipbuilder named Robert Cyril Thompson, who had designed a cargo ship that the British Admiralty wanted because they were fighting in the war in 1939, 1940. They were deep at war with Germany. They needed cargo ships. They needed cargo ships to bring materials to their troops. But the problem was all of their shipyards were essentially at capacity and were in use, building military ships. So the Admiralty said to Robert Cyril Thompson, go to the United States, see if you can find a partner there to help us build these ships for us. Of course, the U.S. was Great Britain's closest ally and friend. Churchill and Roosevelt had a long history together. So the hope and the expectation was that the United States would sort of, stick out its hand and say, well, we're happy to help you. We will help you build these ships. It was a little more complicated than that. And the United States, of course, did want to help, and Roosevelt did want to help. But we were not willing to just sort of turn over our shipyards to the British to build their ships, because our shipyards were busy as well. Right. And so that's where things got complicated.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that's interesting to me about this is that we're building ships, and we'll get into the building of the shipyards and Henry Kaiser and all that stuff. But we're building ships for the British. But in 1940, as Roosevelt was saying, I will not, send your boys into foreign wars. You read your book and you think, okay, everybody knows that we're going to be in World War II. That's why they're so desperate to get this ship building effort underway, right? I mean, isn't this kind of a giveaway that that the whole U.S. government basically is trying to man up to get ready for this war that they know that they're going to be involved in?
So what's funny, what's sort of interesting about, Roosevelt and the American sentiment, for a long time in the late 30s and even into the early 40s, the American public really didn't want to go to war. The American public was very much against the idea of sort of getting involved in what was happening in Europe. Roosevelt was fighting an uphill battle. The Gallup polls all showed the public was very much against getting involved in the war. And Roosevelt was struggling to convince them that, hey, like it or not, war is coming. It's coming. Whether you want to admit it or not, you can be in denial all you want, but it's coming. And one of the things that happened in 1940, 1941 is a number of American vessels were struck by German subs, by German U-boats. There weren't necessarily a lot of deaths yet, but there were a couple of ships finally that happened in 1941 when American sailors, naval sailors, were killed on a couple of strikes by German boats. And when that happened, that was sort of a turning point for a lot of people, for the public. Now you have sort of American blood in the water. And even though we're not yet at war, right, we're still months away from Pearl Harbor happening, Americans start to change their opinions and realize that, oh, okay, this is really going to happen. We're already losing sailors and losing soldiers. And so Roosevelt, I think, then had public sentiment on his side to sort of start being more aggressive and more assertive in preparing America for war.
Yeah. And you have in the book, you have Robert Hudson, who's Britain's Minister of Shipping, says, besides decreasing the death rate, we must increase the birth rate.
Right.
And he's talking about shipping. So maybe you can also sort of set the scene in terms of what's going on in the war, because one of the things that comes through in your book is kind of the need for speed.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were several quotes that really were striking, and that was sort of one of them. The idea was, as you mentioned at the very beginning, we have to build ships faster than the Germans can sink them. That's really what the strategy was. We have to build them fast. Roosevelt made a strategic decision, which I've often talked about. I wonder if the same decision could be made today in the political climate and the political environment that we're in right now. He was under pressure from some of his senior advisors and senior people to build sort of great ships that would last for a generation, ships that would last for 25, 30 years and really sort of string out for a whole generation. That was what some of his chief admirals wanted him to build. But he was sort of the mindset that we don't have that luxury. Those ships would take too long to build. We don't have the plans to build them. We need something fast. We need something quick. We need something that we can just drop and go. And that's sort of what happened. This design from the British, which was not a pretty ship, not a fast ship, not a beautiful ship by any means, but it was a simple ship. It was a simple ship that you could build over and over and over, replicate it at shipyards around the country, and it could be built quickly, almost like a chocolate chip cookie recipe being distributed to all these shipyards. Everyone build this same cookie the exact same way. Yeah. And that really opened the way for America to sort of ramp up its production of these ships. It was a ugly ship. It was nothing about it was impressive other than the speed at which they could be built.
Yeah.
So the person who I think arguably played the largest role in building these ships is somebody who is definitely not a shipbuilder. He's a man named Henry Kaiser, and he's the bald gentleman who's second from the left in this photo with Franklin Roosevelt, who's there on the right. So who is Henry Kaiser, and why does the U.S. government decide to entrust this vital shipbuilding project to a guy who has never built a ship?
Yeah, so a couple of things I found interesting about Henry Kaiser. So first of all, he was born 1882, the same year as FDR, and they were born literally 100 miles apart from each other, both in upstate New York. So they were both born in upstate New York, 100 miles apart from each other in the same year. But they would not cross paths until 50 years down the road. So Kaiser, after meeting a girl and moving out to the Pacific Northwest, he becomes essentially a contractor, a builder of things. He's not an engineer. He's certainly not a shipbuilder. He's just sort of a businessman who has a philosophy on business, which is that if you hire the right people and hire the right managers and give them the right tools, they can do anything. That was sort of his philosophy. He didn't need to be the expert. You just needed to hire the experts, and needed to hire the right people give them the right tools, and they will do anything. So with that philosophy, in the 1920s into the 1930s, he started to become what I would say was a significant but not a hugely important player on the construction universe. Most of his work was in the Pacific Northwest. He was building roads and bridges and even some dams, and he was becoming a big player. But it wasn't until the United States government issued bids and said they would be accepting bids to build a dam in the middle of the desert that would become the largest public works project in American history, the Boulder Dam at the time, later to be known as the Hoover Dam, that Kaiser really sort of made his mark. He put a bid in for that project with a conglomerate of other builders. They won the Boulder Dam project, and they completed it in about 5 years, almost 2 years ahead of schedule and under budget. By doing that, Kaiser landed on the map with someone like Roosevelt. Roosevelt comes out to see the unveiling of the Boulder Dam. He's incredibly impressed by it. And he sort of gets this introduction to this fellow named Kaiser who did this thing. And I think the timing is really important here, right? So we're talking about the mid-1930s now, 1935, 1936. Roosevelt is in the midst of trying to bring the country out of the Depression and out of the Depression-era economy. And Kaiser is a guy who gets things done. He builds things efficiently, effectively. He puts people to work, and he does things really well. Roosevelt sort of realizes that's a guy who might be beneficial to me. I could use someone like that. And conversely, Kaiser, whose entire operation depends on government contracts, well, having a friend in the White House is a pretty powerful friend to have. So the two of them, I think, realize they can help each other. And that's sort of how the relationship between them is born.
Okay. And so, but one of the, again, I find just so fascinating about it is not only has he never built a ship, he
Right.
has no facilities to even start, even if he bought the book. There's
Right.
this wonderful story you tell in the book. Thompson of the British Commission is there, and he's, I guess, signed the contract, or about to sign the contract, and he goes to see Kaiser and says, "So show me the shipyard." And he goes, "But where are the shipyards?" And Kaiser answers, "There are your shipyards," and he's pointing at mud flats.
Right.
So this ties into a question that Lynn Hargrove, one of our viewers, asked, which is, tell us a little bit about just how long did it take to build the infrastructure to then build the ships?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is not very long. Kaiser, the contract was signed in December of 1940 to begin building these ships. So that's when now, again, going back to the premise, the first part of the plan was to build 60 ships for the British. So we're building 60 ships. They're called Ocean class ships. And we're going to build 60 ships for the British. But that changes very quickly because in January of 41, Roosevelt begins to announce that we're also going to be building 200 American cargo ships. So the cargo ship, strategy takes off very quickly. Kaiser, after your anecdote, which is a funny story, puts essentially a stake in the ground in late January of 1941. And by spring of 41, they're off and running. They're building ships by March and April. They've put the first sort of stake in the ground to get ships under construction. So the shipyard itself was really just a couple of buildings and a lot of flat ground, and then a shipway on the water where they could sort of start to erect the ships and the hulls. But it happened very quickly. Within like 3 to 4 months, they were off and running building ships.
So where did the we'll take a Wally Morrison question here. Where did the term Liberty ship come from, and who coined it? Is there a fabulous story there, or is this one of those things that's hidden in the we don't really know?
So it's both of those things. So so as a reporter and as a researcher, I too wanted to know the answer to that question, and I spent what I would say is weeks going down that rabbit hole of trying to find the person who coined the term. I could never find that person. What I found was in May of 1941, a memo went out from the government, and it was announcing what it referred to as the Liberty Fleet. And that was, as far as we can tell, that was the first reference to this fleet of ships being built and the term Liberty being attached to them. So it was a memo from the government, from the Maritime Commission, that said, we're now building the Liberty Fleet. And of course, if it's the Liberty Fleet, that would make the individual ships Liberty
ships.
So that's sort of where the term first appeared. The head of the Maritime Commission was Emery Scott Land, but I'm not clear that he was the one who coined the term. But it was a term that, and as I write about in the book, that sort of had a lot of gravitas to it. And I think that was an important sort of point, that it was a term that had been used throughout history. You can find great quotes with the term liberty in it. And so it really did sort of resonate with the public.
Yeah. So one of the things, another one of the things that I found fascinating was not only the speed and the personalities and all this is coming together, but this is also happening at the same time that we've got the largest naval expansion in U.S. history. We're building the Navy that's later on going to go, fight the Pacific. Right. How are these competing kind of imperatives being balanced, or are they? I mean, that seems like a big ask.
So World War II saw the number that I've sort of seen in a number of places, the largest shipbuilding sort of operation in American history. Built about 13,000 ships over the course of several years. Of those 13,000 ships, 2,710 were Liberty ships. So not quite a quarter of those ships. Yeah. The Liberty ships it was not really a competition. They were all seen as vitally important. The only competition, if you want to call it that, was for steel. There needed to be a lot of steel in order to build all these ships. So steel plant operations had to ramp up significantly in order to build these ships, and making sure the steel was delivered to the shipyards on time and could be used quickly. That was where the competition was. It was more in the supply chain than anything else. Yeah. Just making sure all the ships had the necessary tools and equipment and steel and everything else that was needed.
So I want to remind everybody that we're chatting with Doug Most, who is the author of the book Launching Liberty, The Epic Race to Build the Ships. The type is small here. It's hard for me to read. that
took America to war.
Took America to sea. Okay, fine. I'm sorry. I had a hard time with that, so forgive me. But Doug, who are some of the other leaders who play a big role in this effort? Because Henry Kaiser is probably a name that's still kind of known today. There's a bunch of other people who are involved who really aren't remembered. Can you remember two or three of them for us?
Yeah, there were a couple of people. I mean, I mentioned one of them already, Emery Scott. He went by sort of Jerry Land, was the head of the Maritime Commission. And he was a huge influential figure.
A very interesting guy too.
Very interesting guy. Played in the Army-Navy football game, a famous Army-Navy football game. And he was sort of a fascinating figure and a very trusted figure in Roosevelt's circle. He was the one who really was pushing Roosevelt to build a better, faster, more beautiful ship. He didn't want to build a ship that he knew would last 5 or 10 years. He was like, no, that's a waste of our time and a waste of our energy. Why do we want to do that? And Roosevelt sort of had to essentially overrule him and say, because we don't have the time to wait. But he was a really key figure, working with Kaiser, working with the shipbuilders around the country, and there were many of them, in getting this operation going. Another figure who was really instrumental was Clay Bedford, a name that most Americans won't know. He was one of Kaiser's most loyal employees, worked with him for many, many years, and ran the first Liberty shipyard in Richmond, California, that Kaiser sort of built. And he became sort of a fascinating character for me as well. It's a good example of sometimes as a researcher, as a reporter, you get lucky. Clay Bedford, when I was trying to track down material on him as much as I could, I found his ancestors, and one of them, a woman who lives in Connecticut. And I was able to track down a phone number and reach her. And I basically told her, I'm writing a book about the Liberty ships, and Clay Bedford, your great grandfather, was instrumental in that. And she said, "Oh, of course, we know that story." And she said, "I have his papers in my basement." And I said,
Perfect.
"You do?" And she said, "I do." And I was like, "Would you mind if I paid you a visit?" And so
Hello.
she was very kind. I went to her
Yeah.
house in Connecticut, and went down to her basement, and she essentially handed over all the materials to me so I could take them back to my house and use them during my research. And that was an example just of sort of a reporter's gold mine when you get lucky like that, because she had clips and government papers and newspaper articles and all these things about this guy who really was a character in my book.
Did you give them all back?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
I've given them back, and I just signed a copy of about 6 books that she bought for her family for the holidays.
Oh.
She purchased a bunch. And so I, as a reporter, you always sort of appreciate those stories when you get lucky like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Doug, yeah, I mean, the original, when this all gets started, the British want 60 ships. Then the Americans say, well, we'll build 200.
Right.
And that's impressive. And I've got to be honest, as I'm reading your book, it's like every chapter, Roosevelt says, "Oh, I guess I got add another 1,000."
Right.
I kind of lose track of the numbers.
Right.
But and they're being built all over the country.
Yep.
And they are being built in places that there hadn't been shipyards before. So that's involving mass migrations of people. How does this effort to kind of change the face of the country? I mean, you have movements of people and cities.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, I think, for those of us, obviously, who were not there, I think we have to remember that there was this sort of movement. People wanted to contribute. People wanted to do their part in the war. And that was sort of one of the remarkable things. So first of all, there were originally 9 Liberty shipyards that first started building these. So across the country. So in addition to Richmond, California and Portland, Oregon were 2 of the original ones. There was Baltimore, Maryland. There was Portland, Maine. There was down in Mobile, Alabama, and New Orleans and Houston. So there were shipyards around the country that were launched specifically with the intention of building Liberty ships. That was a critical part of the infrastructure that was needed. And then the other thing was the workers. Workers saw these as good paying, stable government jobs. And that's what they were. And so people who were not being, the men who were not being drafted into the war for various reasons, most young, healthy men were drafted, but those who were not for medical reasons or familial reasons or whatever it might have been, they were looking for good, stable, well-paying jobs. And so here you go, shipyard work. And so even if you'd never built a ship in your life, the shipyards provided training. There were training schools that were set up. The training was fast. It was done in a couple of weeks. And they were given tools and they were put to work. Everything happened sort of unbelievably fast because it had to. There was no time to waste. One of the stories in the books that I think is an important story was when Kaiser sort of is trying to get these ships built faster. He realizes okay, we're building them, 5 months, 4 months it's taking to build the ship, but how do we get that faster and faster? And of course, there was another famous Henry of the day, Henry Ford. And Kaiser sends an employee of his to Detroit to learn how is Henry Ford cranking out 40,000 vehicles a month? How is he doing that? And the answer, of course, was the assembly line. The assembly line was something that Ford had perfected, and assembly line manufacturing and mass product manufacturing, those were things Henry Ford really mastered and perfected. Kaiser sort of tries to figure out a way to apply some of the same Henry Ford assembly line manufacturing processes to the Liberty ship production. And that was really a key step in speeding up the manufacturing of Liberty ships, was figuring out a way to build parts and pieces in separate locations so that the Liberty ships could all be pieced together.
So Kaiser doesn't just revolutionize shipbuilding. He revolutionizes healthcare. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that I didn't know when I read your book is the very well-known healthcare company, Kaiser Permanente,
right,
is born out of the Liberty ship movement. So what's going on here? What's happening? Tell us about that.
So it's actually born even before the Liberty ship production. It's born in some ways on the Boulder Dam project, building some of these dams in the middle of the desert Kaiser sort of had this realization that, every time a worker got injured or sick while building these deserts in these dams in the desert, so to speak, every time a worker got sick, they would have to leave. And they'd have to leave the job site, go to a big city to get treated. That would take a week sometimes for them, and they would lose a week's pay, and they'd be off the job for 5 or 6 days, and that was not very efficient. Kaiser really worked with a doctor that he hired, Sidney Garfield, another sort of character in the book who I talk a lot about. He worked with Garfield to essentially bring the healthcare to the workers. That was their goal. How do we bring healthcare to us rather than make the workers go to the healthcare? And so they built a hospital on the job site, and workers paid a portion of their paycheck, 7 cents at the beginning, out of their paycheck to sort of start getting healthcare treatment. And that was something that was revolutionary at the time, but it did carry over, as you mentioned, into the Liberty Ship program. So Kaiser, when they started building Liberty Ships, did the same idea and bought a hospital in Oakland and started building a hospital there. And that's where many of the workers were treated.
But he gets involved in a lot of things. You mentioned that you say if he wanted to revolutionize shipbuilding, he would have to. He realized that if he wanted to revolutionize shipbuilding, he would have to revolutionize the shipyard. So he's doing a number of things to attract these people. And some of the people that he attracts, which again is unusual for the time, are African Americans. And we had a question about that. Could you tell us a little bit about their experience and maybe bring in the President's Committee on Fair Employment? Because, of course, that comes into the story.
Yeah, so there were a number of things that happened in the World War II sort of economy and the shipbuilding operation. Bringing in sort of allowing sort of the Black Americans to sort of join this process was critical. They were not welcomed or embraced at the beginning by any means. There was some tension. The unions put up some resistance to allowing them in, and Kaiser sort of, helped to sort of break down some of those barriers. He was not perfect by any means. And one of the flaws that a lot of people and criticisms of Kaiser is that he was, if anything, maybe a genius marketer. And I thought he was brilliant at marketing himself. And that was certainly a fair criticism. But he did sort of help open some doors for not only for African Americans, for Black Americans to sort of work in these shipyards, but also for women to sort of join the workforce and to become critical players. That was sort of another thing. The unions, for the most part, were run by, white American guys. And the idea of working alongside Blacks and working alongside women for them was foreign. They didn't like that idea. And so those barriers had to come down in order for this operation to really succeed. And Kaiser was sort of open to that. He wanted that to happen. And the shipyard managers, I should say, were also open to it. They realized that, we don't have the luxury of being picky here. The old saying, beggars can't be choosy. We need workers, and we need them fast. We need lots of them. And whatever skin color they are, whatever gender they are, we'll take them. If they're healthy and can help, we want them. And that sort of really did create a melting pot in many of the shipyards that had never been seen before.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what motivates Henry Kaiser in his life. And you have a quote about him late in the book where this is a quote from him.
Yeah.
And he says, "Our real job is not the building of dams, ships, factories, and hospitals. Our job is to build and develop people to bring out their courage, their talents, their zeal, and their will to work." Now, is that a clue of what motivates him, or do you must have thought about this. This guy is an engine on fire to do things. What is his motive? And he's always skipping launches, and he's skipping award ceremonies.
Right.
And what makes him go? What gets him going in the morning?
I think Kaiser was really beloved by his employees. His employees really appreciated him. And again, for better or worse, and he was not a perfect businessman by any means, but his workers, I think the healthcare operation that he set up was really critical, and it sort of showed his employees that he cares about us. And I think, again, going back to his sort of beginning philosophy, if you hire the right people, give them the right managers and the right tools, they can do anything. That philosophy really did carry him, and it's how he operated. And so he sort of would, I'm building a bridge. If you're a steady, good worker who will show up on time and do your job assigned to you, then you can work for me. He didn't know how to build a bridge, but he knew how to get the right people to build a bridge. And the same thing applied to the Liberty ship. So I think that the fact that he trusted his employees, he put trust in them, was really, I think, an element of his success. He was rumored in 1944 to be a vice presidential candidate for FDR as he was running for another term. Probably the only reason he didn't get it, if there's only, there may be multiple reasons, but one of the big reasons he didn't get the nod is because he had given a speech some years earlier advocating for a sales tax. And when Roosevelt heard about that and got wind of this speech that Kaiser had given advocating for sales tax, he knew he was dead in the water. So he never materialized. But Kaiser was a very popular American. Time magazine and one of their Person of the Year contests, he finished third in one of those contests. So he was a very popular figure for a few years in American culture.
So, Doug, what's so special about Hull 440?
Yeah, so the hulls were given numbers, and eventually the ships, when they were built, were given names. And the naming process was a fun chapter to write about how ships got their names. They were the only criteria essentially at the beginning of the naming process was you had to be dead and you had to be American. Those were the initial criteria. The dead one never changed, but the American one did change. And eventually they allowed foreigners and other people to have ships named after them. So in the summer of 1942, when production of Liberty ships has really started to ramp up, and ships are now being built essentially at an average speed of about taking about a month to build a Liberty ship. So fast to get Liberty ships completed. Kaiser, I guess you could say he created sort of a marketing stunt, if you want to call it that. He pitted two of his shipyards, Portland, Oregon, and Richmond, California, against each other. One of the things you have to remember about the Liberty ships, it was difficult to get Americans excited about these ships. We're talking about ugly, hulking steel cargo ships, not aircraft carriers, not military vessels, not the kind of things that you can get patriotism behind. It was a boring cargo ship. Kaiser wanted to figure out a way to get people excited about these ships. And he pitted these two shipyards against each other and told them, you are now in competition. Who can build the fastest Liberty ship? So over the course of several months in late 1942, starting in September, let's say, the Portland shipyard built a Liberty ship in 26 days. That was very fast. The Richmond shipyard responded and built one in 18 days, even faster. A couple of weeks later, Portland launched a ship in 10 days. And when they launched the one in 10 days, everyone sort of thought, okay, that's the record. No one's going to beat 10 days. The Richmond shipyard, to quote a current day cliche, said, hold my beer. They sort of encouraged all of their workers to submit all the ideas they could come up with to cut an hour off of the time here, an hour off of the time there, whatever they could do to slim and trim time off of the shipbuilding operation. And on November 7th, 1942, at midnight, 1,000 workers positioned themselves around the shipyard in Richmond, California. A whistle blew, and the workers were off. It was like a huddle breaking in football. And they all ran to their positions and started working. And for essentially a little less than 5 days straight, they worked around the clock, 24/7 in rotating 8-hour shifts. And on November 12th, 1942, what was known as hull number 440, and the name on the ship was the SS Robert E. Peary, was launched from Richmond. And the finish time was 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. And that ship became sort of the standard bearer for speed production of Liberty ships. To be clear, it was a stunt, and it was never going to be replicated. They weren't going to try to do that again. It was done to sort of excite people, and it did. When I was researching the Robert E. Peary, there were newspaper articles written around the country in that following week. Kaiser launches ship in 4 days. That would never have happened without sort of that sort of, gimmick that he created to launch these ships. So it was an exciting moment. The Peary was this amazing ship. People often ask me, one of the questions I get, did it float? The answer is not only did it float, it served throughout the war. It was at D-Day. It was at Normandy. It really had an amazing history. And it was a great story.
So I'm going to try to, I've never done this before. I'm going to try to combine 3 different questions here.
Get it out of the park here.
Okay, really, really working on this here. But we have a question here from Wally who says, because of the remarkable speed of production of each ship, did any of them fail because of flaws driven by speed? And we have a question from Yvonne who says, can you talk about the sinking of Liberty ships on the route to Russia from brittle fracturing? Investigation of this led to parts of the ASME boiler and pressure valve vessel code. And then finally, okay, are you holding all this in your head, Doug?
I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay. Wally says, if these ships were designed to last 5 to 6 years versus 25 to 50 years, what happened to most of them afterward? Did they all fall apart in 1946? I don't think so.
They did not. So, all right. So let's see here. So let's talk about the fractures and the flaws in the ship. So the ships were, for the most part, remarkably durable. It's estimated that only 200 to 300 ships were lost in the war of the 2,710. So most of them succeeded and floated and sailed successfully. If they didn't survive the war, a large part because they were sunk in battle and fights. But yes, there were some ships that were found to have cracks in the hulls. And there were a lot of investigations of what was causing these cracks. Some of the cracks were caused by faulty welds. The ships were welded together, and some of them were caused by faulty welding. Some of them, it was found, were caused by flawed steel. So again, the steel manufacturing process in the country was vast, and so not all of the steel was incredibly consistent. And so some of the steel was found to have some flaws in it. So there were multiple reasons why some ships developed cracks. And eventually what happened was the government decided they would modify the Liberty ship design ever so slightly. And they built a second fleet of ships called the Victory Fleet after the Liberty ships. And there were about 400 Victory ships that were built. It was slightly different. I would call them like a first cousin of the Liberty ship, if you want to think of it that way. They were almost identical side by side. And so the Victory ships were essentially created to address some of the flaws in the design and the steel and the welding that surfaced in the Liberty ships. But I guess I want to repeat that, the ships really were successful. The vast
you mentioned in the book that, some ships fail and there's cracking and fracturing, but one of the ships that doesn't fail from any of that is the Robert Peary, the fastest built one. So it's not, it didn't have to do with the speed. It had to do with other issues, related issues.
Yeah, it's true. The most of the ships really were successful. And then to that last question about what happened after the war, the ships were, for the most part, they were used in the 50s for much less urgent sort of reasons. Some of them continued to be used for cargo runs and for merchant marines and that kind of reason. But they really did start to become obsolete in the 50s and into the 60s. And in the 1960s, many of them were essentially scuttled and scrapped for their steel. So the steel could be reused for other purposes. So most of them were essentially put out to pasture, if you want to say it that way. And they did not have long lives beyond the war. There were exceptions to them, and some lasted much longer into the 70s. And the John W. Brown, as I mentioned, was used in public school in New York City. So there were quirky reasons some of them lasted longer.
So, Doug, I mean, given what a massive project this was, I was aware of the Liberty ships, but I had no idea of the scale of it really until I read the book. Is there a legacy to this program? Were there long-term impacts? Did anything come out of this that sort of changed how things were done after?
Well, it's interesting. So right now there actually is there's a couple companies that are actually in the process of building what they are calling the Liberty ship of the future, which is sort of interesting. They're autonomous ships, almost like drone ships, if you want to call it that would have no crews on them. And they are cargo ships that could almost be turned into other kinds of ships. So they'd be multifaceted and sort of flexible in how they can be used. But the Liberty ship is getting sort of a second breath, if you want to call it that. People are referring to the Liberty ship of the future or Liberty ship 2.0. And you're starting to hear that term thrown around a little bit.
Mhm.
So there is going to be, I think, a legacy of them. I think honestly the most important legacy is the workers who built them. It's something that sort of I really have a grown an appreciation for. One quick anecdote I'll tell: when you're researching World War II, as I was in 2020, 2021, you realize that, you know, if I'm trying to find someone who built a Liberty ship, who worked on a Liberty ship, if you do the math, it was not in my favor. Let's say someone was 20 years old in 1940.
Yeah.
That means they were born in 1920. That means when I was starting my research in 2020, they were 100 years old.
Yeah.
So the research that I spent trying to find someone who worked on a Liberty ship was long. In 2023, I got lucky. I stumbled on an article up in Maine, and it was a birthday party celebration for a husband and wife who had both worked in the Portland, Maine shipyard. And they were celebrating their birthdays. And I reached out to the daughter and I said, is there any chance, you know, I could speak to either of your parents? And she said her mother had passed away about 6 months earlier, but her father was still around. He was 102 and he had worked in the Liberty shipyard. He was happy to share his story with me. I hustled up to Maine a couple days later, and I sat in their kitchen meeting with Arthur Babineau, and he told me what it was like to work in the shipyard. And for me, those were 3 incredible hours, just sitting with Arthur, listening to him tell his story, working in the shipyard, working on these Liberty ships. That's really the legacy. It's these men and women who, you know, many of them are no longer with us, who built this incredible, underappreciated part of the war.
Mhm.
You know, our troops don't win the war without the Liberty ships. I think that's pretty obvious. They needed the stuff to get to them. The
Yeah.
Liberty ships helped it. So when I think about the legacy, that's what I think of. I'll probably think of Arthur Babineau.
Yeah.
Could we do it today, Doug? If the situation changed and we
The only
needed to
thing
do
I would
something
say
like
to
that?
Yeah, the only thing I would say to that is it goes back to that decision Roosevelt made, you know, to build not the best ship, the fastest ship, the prettiest ship, the most beautiful ship, but to just build a ship fast. The question is whether politicians today could sort of be willing to set aside their ego and to set aside sort of some of the, you know, the goals, like we have to build a better ship than China's building or what have you. Would we be willing to do that? Would there be an appetite to do that? Because that's really what the Liberty ship was. It was not the best cargo ship. It was a ship that just could be built fast. And I don't know if we have that capacity and willingness to sort of set aside the American ego to sort of do something like that today. It'll be an interesting question.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us today on History Happy Hour to chat
Happy.
about Liberty ships. And I want to just mention, of course, that Doug's book is called Launching Liberty. I know some of you have already gone and bought it. Good move. Okay. I'm not going to try to read the subtitle again because I don't want to embarrass myself this time. But it's a fascinating story, many interesting bits and pieces to it. And well worth the read. So do take a look at that. And the two, we should just remind people, because some people might
Yeah.
be, the 2 existing Liberty ships are
They're in,
John Brown in Baltimore,
right?
Yeah.
John W. Brown, SS John W. Brown in Baltimore, and the SS
Jeremiah
Jeremiah
O'Brien.
O'Brien in
in
San Francisco.
Yeah, I have visited the O'Brien, and of course they're probably really similar.
Yeah, they are. The O'Brien is been maintained a little more as an original Liberty ship, and the Brown, because it was used as a school and a museum, has been modified a little bit on the inside. But certainly to the average layperson, they are, you know, identical.
Well, and as I told you on Friday when we were chatting, Doug, and I'll just recap very briefly, my dad's cousin, Don Zubrod, was a 19-year-old serving on the Liberty ship Roger B. Taney, sunk off the coast of South Africa, spent 42 days in a lifeboat with 26 other guys, something like that. and they were picked up 3 miles off the coast of Brazil.
Wow.
And I talked to Don about this. He had lost weight. He was 86 pounds or something when they were picked up. And he said, I was never hungry again in my whole life. He said, I ate. I knew I needed to eat, but I was never hungry again. So it's an amazing story with a lot of different parts to it. Yeah.
One thing I'll mention, if I can give a quick little plug for people who do buy the book, and if they want it personalized, obviously I can't sign every person's book, but what I can do is I've created a book plate, and so if people drop me an email, it sort of looks like this. It's a sticker that goes inside the book, and so if you send me an email from my website, it's just dougsmost@gmail.com. I will sign this to whoever you tell me to. So it gets personalized, and then I send it to you along with a couple cool bookmarks. So just a way to personalize your copy of the book as if I signed the actual book for you.
So, and it's dougsmost@gmail.com.
Correct.
All right. I put that up.
Excellent.
Doug, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Happy holidays to you.
You too.
We'll hope to stay in touch, but thanks again for the
I
time.
hope so. Thank you.
Cheers. Fantastic. Okay. So we will be back live next week. You'll be, I don't know where, but someplace in France is my guess.
I think I'll be in the Vosges by then.
Okay. And we'll be talking next week to Helen Fry about her new book, Nuremberg, the Translator's Trial, which I think is actually a refreshed copy of an old book.
Yeah, I guess some of the interest when the recent Nuremberg movie caused her to revise that. So.
Yeah, and so we've been discussing whether Helen has been on. This will be her 4th or 5th time. We're going to have our crack research team looking into that, getting us an answer, and if she deserves a hat, we'll make sure to get her a hat before the show happens. So we're hard at work on that right now. Don't panic. Don't lose any sleep over this. Anybody out there?
Right. Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. Shout at us on Blue Sky. Listen to our podcast. Back us on Patreon.com and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
For joining us.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Happy holidays to you.
You too.
We'll hope to stay in touch, but thanks again for the
I
time.
hope so. Thank